Hi, and welcome back to Good Distinctions, where good distinctions are the spice of life. My name is Will Wright. I'm your host, and I'm here joined by Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Very, very excited to have you on, Deacon. Welcome.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be with you.
So you wrote a book recently for Ignatius Press entitled Building a Civilization of Love, a Catholic Response to Racism. Which I know last time we were together, you had said you were writing it. I was so excited about this book. It's been a couple years in the making. It's a very timely book, a very important book. I read it. I absolutely love it. Everyone out there, go buy it, read it, give it to your friends, Catholic or not. I mean, there's some really, really good stuff in here. Um, just as in terms of an overview of the book, just so people know sort of what we're looking at, you start off in the first chapter, and I plan on just kind of walking through bits and pieces of it. So in chapter 1, you talk about the difference between prejudice and racism. And I mean, we're good distinctions. This is what we're about. And this was a great distinction right off the bat. So in your mind, and kind of, I know you lay this out in the book, but what's the difference between prejudice and racism? And why do you think the terminology matters? And then kind of second part of that question, you talk about language in terms of, like, you prefer using people of color. You identify as a Black man rather than saying African American. So I'd love you to speak to that as well.
Yeah, sure. So if I could, Will, if I could just talk about a little bit about why I wrote the book and,
Yeah,
and how
absolutely.
that came about. So during the pandemic, I couldn't travel. I usually travel about 250,000 miles a year, and I couldn't go anywhere. And so I
Hmm.
said, well, there are two things that are on my heart that I wanted to write about. One of them was the diaconate, because at that time I was approaching 20 years of ordained ministry. And so I wanted to do a reflection on the service ministry of the deacon. And so that was the first book that I wrote. Um, uh, and then I also want to talk about this race issue because obviously the pandemic was a time when the whole George Floyd and
Hmm.
a number of issues between police officers and um, people of color were occurring. And so as I was following the dialogue, I saw that there was really a lot of polemics, a lot of triumphalism, a lot of posturing, a lot of
Hmm.
attacking, but there was really nothing there that talked about reconciliation, healing, getting to the root of what this is really about, and then truly dealing with it. And I thought that the Catholic Church was perfectly positioned to deal with this issue because let's be real, Will, always comes from behind when it
Hmm.
comes to important issues in the culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's because the bishops of the United States are still reeling from the sex abuse scandal. So I believe they feel they have no moral credibility when it comes to issues like this. So um, instead of talking about and addressing this issue in a firm and direct way, I think the emphasis in the church has been on uh, migrants and immigrants and Mother Earth and stuff like that. I mean, I'm an immigrant, right? So those are important issues,
Hmm.
but no one's leaving the church over the earth or migrants or immigrants. They're leaving because they don't know Jesus Christ. They don't know
Amen.
him
Yeah.
deeply, personally, and intimately. And so I thought the Catholic Church's position, not from the hierarchical perspective, but from the grassroots, from the parish level, to be able to dig into this issue and start to really break down the wall of racial division, starting with within ourselves, then within the church, and then within the culture. And so I wrote the book kind of to give an overview of what this issue is really about, and then come up with some solutions that I think that they're not difficult, but it's going to take work and effort to enter into another person's experience, to empathize with them, and to help move the healing and racial reconciliation forward.
Hmm.
So
Well, and
the
I think a large part of that would be language, right? If people aren't
yes,
speaking the same language, then they're not going to be able to have that conversation. If you could speak to that distinction between
distinction,
prejudice and
yes,
racism.
exactly. So what's happening? What's happened is that those terms have become conflated. So
Hmm.
when someone says something, the immediate emotional response is "That's racist. That's racist." Well, hold on, hold on. We have to make a distinction between racism and prejudice because they're not the same thing. So in the book, what I do is I say prejudice, as it's related to race, is a
Mhm.
preconceived notion about someone that's not based on any factual or objective experience, and that kind of thinking leads to stereotyping.
Mhm.
Whereas racism is prejudice, as I just defined it, um, with the added piece that the reason why I believe this is that my race is superior to your race, and that's
Mhm.
racism. So let me give an example. I mentioned in the book that at a parish mission several years ago, someone came up to me and because they found out I went to Notre Dame for my undergraduate degree, and he said,
Yeah.
"Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What position did you play?"
Mhm.
So, so the so someone hearing that statement say that was racist. That was racist. He just assumed he played football because he was black, and that wasn't racist. It was prejudice. Now, why? Now, if when he saw me, I could see the calculus in his mind. He sees me. He looks at my size, and he said, "Okay, large man plus Notre Dame equals football." You know that was what was going
Yeah.
on in his head. So if that statement was racist, he would have to have meant when he said it. The reason why I just said that to you is I believe that people that look like you are not intelligent enough to get into one of the best academic institutions in the United States. Therefore, people of color can only get in an institution of that caliber through athletics.
Mhm.
That would have been racist. But that's not what he meant, because when he found out that I actually never played football in my life, that I actually had an academic scholarship, then he went, "Oh, okay. Oh, Deacon, sorry." He was apologetic and kind of backpedaling and that kind of thing. So what should have happened, we said, "Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What did you study?" Because that's what he would
Mhm.
have asked anybody else. See, so that's the distinction I make between prejudice and racism, because we all have prejudice attitudes. I mean, we're all
Sure.
prejudiced.
Yeah.
Like when I first started traveling to the South, Southern United States, I thought, well,
Mhm.
everybody down here eats shrimp and grits, because I'd always believed. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I gotta tell you, I'm from North Carolina. I read that in the book, and I thought, but I do love shrimp and grits.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and it's true. I mean, there are people in the South, because I just thought everybody in the South eats shrimp and grits, but then I
yeah.
found out that some people don't like it. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, what? And so you start thinking, well, where did that come from?
Mhm.
And we so because we're not innately racist. We're not born racist. Anecdotally, think of little kids on a playground, right? They're 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. They're just playing and having fun, and they don't care about color.
Yeah.
They're just having fun. But what happens over time? They with movies and television shows and social media and jokes from their friends, and maybe they overhear a conversation with an adult member of their family or something like that, and these prejudices start to become learned behavior. So we learn these attitudes of racism and prejudice. So my contention is, if you can learn something, you can unlearn it, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
so
Good
we have
point.
to become aware of the prejudices and even maybe even racist attitudes within ourselves. Do not be afraid to confront them. And let the healing power of Jesus Christ come into our lives to bring that reconciliation with his incredible love and divine mercy, so that in turn we could become vehicles of mercy for others by entering into their experience and sharing our faith in a vibrant and dynamic way, especially when it comes to the issue of race.
Well, and it's an issue which a lot of people find very uncomfortable to talk about, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I mean, I think you in the book you bring up three things in particular. You bring up critical race theory, liberation theology, and the Black Lives Matter movement. We'll get to that in a second, but I mean, these are I don't want to say, well, they are controversial issues, but the reason they're controversial is people have very strong feelings about them. I mean, these are things that elicit the sort of response that, like, if you go to a family gathering, you don't talk about what religion, politics, and I can't remember the third one, but you get the point. Like, there's certain things that people don't want to engage with, which I think you and I might be different. We'd be like, let's get into it, let's go. But most people, they kind of get squeamish. Even the guy that you were talking about who assumed you went to Notre Dame for football. I mean, what was his response after you corrected him? I mean, obviously he's probably mortified to some extent. But was he uncomfortable immediately because do you think that he saw in himself prejudice that
Well,
sort of
well,
resonate, and
see,
he goes, "Oh, I don't want to get into this conversation anymore."
if I was a white guy that was 6'6", he would have thought I played basketball.
Yeah,
Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What position you play on the basketball team? You see,
yeah,
so I mean, it's those kinds of prejudices that I'm talking about. Where you're just making a preconceived notion based on not
hmm,
anything subjective or objective, without any knowledge of the person or any knowledge of the person's experience or anything. So we all have those to some extent, but we're
hmm,
so used to just being around other people maybe that have those same prejudices, we don't stop to look at them within ourselves.
hmm,
So for example, um, people may know a little bit about my background in law enforcement. One of the things I did was I used to teach at the police academy in Oregon, the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training. In fact, I was on the board that oversaw the operations and the training of police officers in the entire state of Oregon. So I'm very intimately familiar with how police officers are trained. So when you do, for example, in traffic stop school, you learn how to do an effective and safe traffic stop. And they teach you all the techniques to do that safely. What they
hmm,
don't teach in the academy in general, what they don't look for, what they don't test for, is prejudicial attitudes within the officer. So when you're teaching an officer to do a traffic stop, there's certain things where you're supposed to look at. There's certain things you're supposed to ask. There's certain way you're supposed to approach the vehicle. But if someone is prejudiced, say against people of color, or something like that, they'll walk up to the car not just with the techniques that they're being taught, but also with this attitude.
hmm,
You see, oh, this person's black, so I have to make sure I'm particularly careful because I'm not going to go home that night. Whereas they may walk up to someone, a young adult, maybe white female, and they won't feel they won't feel unsafe. They won't feel as, oh, this is just, but you can't think like that. All of them have to be approached the same way. So what,
right,
what we have to learn how to do is, it was at the police academy level, is to recognize, try find a way, an exercise, a system, or something to recognize and identify those prejudices within the police officer before they go out onto the street. So one or two
hmm,
things should happen once they identify them at the academy level. Either they learn to effectively deal with that prejudice, to recognize it and to confront it and deal with it, or get them out of there before they hurt somebody.
yeah,
That's what
right,
should be happening. And I think the same thing is true for ourselves. I mean, at the parish, you don't want to go to the Hispanic mass because that's for the Hispanics. Well, no, wait, what? Yeah, say you get up late, and oh shoot, man, I missed my usual 10 o'clock mass. The only mass that's left is the 12 o'clock mass. Oh, but that's the Hispanic mass. I'll just go to another parish. What's wrong with going to the Spanish mass? I mean,
yeah,
you don't speak the language, but you know what's going on. Come on. I mean, and that's your
for
parish, and
sure.
they are your parishioners. That's part of your parish family. You see,
Hmm.
these are things we need to open ourselves to and embrace if we're really going to be a vehicle of reconciliation and mercy in the life of the church.
When you go to great lengths in the book, I mean, it's very well researched, but you always bring it back. It's very, very consistent throughout. It's about love. And I think you end with this. You say, only love can completely transform the human person. I think that's a
That's right.
direct quote. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's true. There's the love of Jesus Christ is something that is transformative. And you also point out that we need to see the imago Dei in others. We need to see the image of God in others. That before anything else, we're made in the image and likeness of God, and that's not going to look a certain way. It's not like God looks like me or looks like you, um, but we have this sonship in Him that transcends any sort of particular characteristics.
Yes,
Um,
exactly right. And a couple things. The title of the book is actually "A Building a Civilization of Love," is from St. John Paul II. who was, I mean, man, that was my man. I mean, John
Yeah.
Paul too. I mean, he was really transformative for me,
Hmm.
in learning the why of what the church teaches, what it teaches. John Paul II filled in that why blank for me in a very powerful way. And so
Hmm.
that's actually a quote from him, Building a Civilization of Love in Familiaris Consortio. Um, and so the idea of love, the 1 John 4:16, God is love, right? And he who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in him. The fact that God condescended, came down to our level in the person of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to show us the Father, to bring us deeply into a relationship of intimate, personal, loving, and life giving communion through a covenant relationship of love, a love that's not centered on the self, not the self centered, egotistical love of the culture, but the
Hmm.
love that gives itself away, right? That's always looking out at what's best for the other, right? Is when you give yourself away in love, is when you truly find yourself in God, right? So that's the kind of love I'm talking about. That's the kind of love that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about. You have to think about, why was he so effective here in the midst of Jim Crow, in the
Hmm.
midst of everything that was going on at that time in the 60s. Here's this Baptist preacher that comes onto the scene. And why was he able to bring people together, to transcend race and color and religion and political ideology and liberal and conservative and Democrat and Republican? He brought all kinds of people together, and he didn't base it on a social program. He didn't base it on social construct. He didn't base it on things like reparations. He based it on the love of Jesus Christ and the gospel.
Hmm.
And even though he didn't necessarily use that language, but that was
Yeah.
the
Right.
ethos that underpinned his approach to the
Hmm.
racial issue. And I said, man, he nailed it. So that's why I include parts of his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech and letter to a Birmingham jail, where he really looks at and outlines his program for how he was going to deal with this issue of race. So I'm not saying I'm picking up the ball and where Martin Luther King left off. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying, that as Catholics, we have to have that same look through the same lens of the gospel and of our faith to bring true healing and reconciliation. And it starts with, as you said, seeing the image and likeness of God in the person standing in front of us, just like Mother Teresa did. When she
Hmm.
saw those poor people she worked with on the streets of Calcutta, she saw Jesus Christ first. And that's what we need to do as well.
Well, and Dr. King did not. He didn't do like some others in his time did. Some other, I know Malcolm X was very much. He was perfectly fine with violence. He used Marxist ideas, and there was many others like him. Then there was some that were saying, "Well, let's just kind of." I know we use the word transcend race, and I know how you mean it, but some people go as far as to say, well, I'm colorblind. I don't see race. Well, that's shenanigans. Like, yes, you do. Shut up. But what Martin Luther King Jr. does that I think is so excellent, and just to echo everything you said, he founds it on Jesus Christ. He talks about race. He talks about overcoming these prejudices and this racism, but he also doesn't shy away from the fact that he's a black man and that he's with white men and their history. I mean, I have a copy of I have a dream speech here. There's this one passage that I just absolutely love. He says, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I mean, that's acknowledging our history. So many people want to cancel our like cancel culture and get rid of the history, tear down the statues, forget about the past. Or, as you said, like talk about reparations and all these things and saying we need to drag up the past and push it forward as something that's not overcome yet. We need to make sure we atone for all of these injustices rather. I mean, I remember seeing in 2020, especially, groups of white mostly white liberals bowing down before groups of black people just weeping and apologizing. And I don't know what to make of that, to be very honest. Like, if when you see things like that, I mean, what would you say to somebody that's doing that?
See, that's not doing anything. I mean, I think I understand the mentality and maybe even the spirit in which they're doing that, but that's not going to solve the issue.
Yeah, and I can
That's
understand
just
it too.
surface.
I mean, I would want to overcome all the. Like I said, I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. Like, plenty of racism. Yeah, that wasn't prejudice. I mean, I knew people whose parents were in the KKK.
Mm.
Then. I was. I mean, talk about a culture shock. I went from this elementary school, Catholic school, with a bunch of people from New England, and then went to a public high school in the middle of nowhere. 60% of the school was black. Probably 30% were white, and then 10% were mostly Hispanic. And the things that I saw, it was the first time I had to really grapple with any of these things because I hadn't seen it before. And it was absolutely shocking to me, the level of inhumanity, just the things that I heard and witnessed. Another thing that people bring up a lot is this idea of reverse racism. They say, well, I don't want to be racist, but um, there's been a lot of things that I think black people are racist to white people. Is reverse racism. And I haven't heard a good response to that. That sort of redirects it in a charitable way to something that just doesn't become like us versus them mentality, because that's not the idea. That's absolutely not what we're trying to go towards. But the only response that I've seen to something like that would be like a Marxist Hegelian sort of response of well, it's not racism because racism has to be prejudice based on race plus power.
Yeah.
And so I've heard that response from the left. I've heard that sort of social response. But what would you say to somebody who's maybe like white conservative? They don't have a lot of black friends. They haven't interacted with a lot of people, but they keep bringing up this idea of reverse racism. How would you respond to them?
Yeah. So here's the thing. What drives this whole racist prejudice thing in the first place is fear, right? In 1 John 4:19, John says, "Perfect love casts out all fear." And the
Hmm.
word he uses in Greek there for perfect is teleos, which means mature and whole. So we have to have mature and whole attitude and response to fear. Because think about it.
Hmm.
You, so if I'm black, and I think I talk about this in the book, I got to an elevator once with a white
Yeah, you
woman
didn't. Yeah.
who backed up against the back of the elevator and grabbed her purse and like she was afraid. And I was wearing a suit and a crucifix, and she was still scared of me.
Yeah.
Again, and I mentioned that yes, she may have had as law enforcement, former law enforcement. I understand she may have had PTSD because of an incident that may have happened to her. She may have been attacked. She may have been assaulted or something like that, and she still has trauma being in an elevator, a confined space with someone she doesn't know. I mean, I get that. So I have no problem with the response of her backing up, but her grabbing her purse, like what's I gonna steal it right in the middle? I mean, that's the piece of it. So there's fear. And on the other side,
Yeah.
if you're black and you walk into a situation where there's a number of people who are white, you must say, oh, they might do something to me, or they might. There's this fear. So fear is driving this whole thing. What we have to do is get beyond the surface. Like you said, well, I don't see
Hmm.
color. That's ridiculous. We all see color. The response has to be deeper than that. It's not what you don't see, is what you have to learn what to see in that person. That's the key.
Hmm.
So, for example, people will say to me, "Well, you are a black Catholic," and I say, "No, I'm not. I'm a Catholic who's black." "What do you mean? Are you denying your black identity?" I said, "Well, no. But what I'm saying is this: when I die and I stand before Jesus Christ and give an account for my life, He's not going to ask me how black I am. He's going to say,
Yeah.
did you pick up your cross and follow me even when it was
Hmm.
hard, even when people ridiculed you and they mocked you because you refused to cave into the redefinition of marriage and gender and all the social constructs and all the moral relativism in that culture. Did you cave in and capitulate and go with the flow? Right now, we're getting a lot of rain in Oregon. The rivers are running. So you know what I noticed, Will? Dead things go down the river. Dead things go with the flow. We have to be the
Hmm.
salmon. The salmon fight upstream against the flow for one purpose only: to lay their eggs, to bring life. So we have to be the salmon. So Jesus is going to say, I gave you talents, deacon. I gave you fatherhood. I gave you husbandhood. I gave you the diaconate. Where's my 50-fold, 100-fold return on the investment I made in you? That's what he's going to ask. So my identity is not in my race. It's not who I have sex with. It's not my racial ethnicity. It's none of that. My identity is a divine identity as an adopted son of the living God, who is in a deep, intimate relationship with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, the Word that became flesh, who dwelt among us, who is our brother, who died for my sins. That is my identity. It's a divine identity. And once we see that divine identity in the person standing in front of us, now we're able to appreciate all the accoutrement that goes along with that person's particular identity in Christ: their color, their race, their music, their language. I was born in Barbados. Like I mentioned, I'm an immigrant. I
Hmm.
still love my music. I still love our food. I still love our culture. I still speak our dialect. I love everything about being black. I thank God every day that I'm black, but that is not my identity. That is the problem. People are
Hmm.
self-identifying with whatever the cultural construct they happen to align themselves with: a political party, a gender, a race, whatever it is. And we have to. That's my point in the book. Black, white. We have to go beyond that to look at the divine identity of that person. That's why I talked about the Imago Dei, seeing that
Hmm.
first and then responding from that. That will get us past all the surface things that you're talking. This reverse racism, all that will go away once we start seeing people that way.
Awesome. Yeah, just bringing it back to first principles and saying, look, no, let's focus on this. Well, and that brings up another thing that you said in the book. You said the church is one and diverse. She's one because she's the single body of Christ. She's diverse because she's made up of every culture, people, race, and ethnicity. The church supports diversity because she is essentially universal without being uniform. And I love that. I love that so much. Not just even before bringing up the question of race. I mean, this is something that I spoke with my friend Simone on the podcast recently about. There's 24 Eastern rites of the Catholic Church. There's the West. There's the Latin rite. There's all these different religious orders with all their different peculiarities. I mean, when I share that with Protestants, it blows their mind. They're like, "Wait," and I can see the wheels turning. We didn't have to leave the church to have our particular way of living. They're like, no, you don't. Come back. But it's the same sort of thing. This idea of, because some today in the culture will say, well, diversity is our strength, and they just sort of leave it that. It's always got to be about power. It's always in these power dynamics. But the way that you put it here, the church supports diversity because she's essentially universal without being uniform. I mean, that's it. But primarily, that begins, like you say, with the Imago Dei. We are sons and daughters of God in baptism, and then everything else flows from that. Our universal vocation to holiness first, and then our particular vocation, whether it be to be a husband, father, um, a deacon, whatever that might be, and then a more particular vocation, lowercase v, of what we might do, like a job, and these sorts of things. So in that sort of structure, we have all these other things about us. I mean, mine isn't racial. I was born in Canada. I mean, if you look in the encyclopedia, next to white person, it would be me. I mean, I'm British. I did that DNA thing. I am 79% English and 21% Irish. Like, there's
Wow.
nothing else. That's crazy white. I don't know how to embrace my whiteness, but like, but I will say, what's interesting is I've never been to the United Kingdom. I've never stepped foot in England, but the draw of it, like even English history, English culture, like it pulls me in and I can't explain it. So there's something there. I mean, there's something beautiful in that. And it's like, you don't have to like English hymns from the 1800s, but dang it, I do. Um, so it's kind of interesting how God uses all these different particularities, and they don't have to be in competition. They shouldn't be in competition in a very real
Exactly.
sense. But
Because think about you said some very wonderful things there, Will. Let me approach it this way. I've been to 31 countries speaking, and and I'm mostly in the United States when I speak. I'm just gonna be real. It's to white people. I mean, the
yeah.
vast majority of the people I speak to in many parishes, conferences, retreats, all throughout the United States are not black. I'm just be real, okay? When I go overseas, I spend a lot of time in Asia. Again, different audiences, but I was in Papua New Guinea in 2023, and it was and there were thousands of people that came to the talks. Will and they were all black, and to see people that look like me
Hmm.
out there, hearing the gospel. And if there was so much race and prejudice in the church, how come I'm so busy, Will? I get invitations to speak every single day of the year. I travel 250,000 miles a year. And most of the people I speak to are white. Let's be real. And why are they bringing me in over and over? Someplace I've been to 3-4 times. Why? Oh, because they're racist. They don't know, because they recognize that this person is speaking the truth of Jesus Christ. No matter what color he is, he's bringing
Hmm.
the truth. He's helping us to make that connection between our faith and our everyday lived experience. So sacraments actually mean something now, because I see the nexus between sacraments and how I live my faith every day in the world. That's what they
Hmm.
want to hear. They want to hear truth. They want to hear beauty. They want to hear goodness. They want to hear how the truth sets them free to become the person who God created them to be. And that's that. And people are, that's what they're attracted to, and that's why they bring me out. If there was all this racist, I'd be sitting at home probably doing something else for a living.
Hmm.
Come on. This is my point. And it works the other way around too. I mean, I know black parishes that bring in white speakers.
Hmm.
Like Chris Stefanik and other guys, like they'll bring them because they love the message,
Yeah.
regardless of the person's color. It's the message. That's what should matter.
Well, there's one point that you say, oh, how we overcome racism. You say overcoming racism must be a work of the spirit with an eschatology directed toward heaven, not earth. And so I know we have a limited amount of time. I don't want you to have to rehash everything you put in the book. Like, everyone listening, just go buy the book and read it. But critical race theory, liberation theology, Black Lives Matter, they don't have an eschatology directed towards heaven. It's directed towards earth. It's very material in a lot of different ways and for particular ways. But two questions. First, why did you choose these three? I'm sure there was others you could have chosen. So why
Yeah.
these three? And then the second is, there was another point in the book where you talk about how you didn't want to talk about Black Lives Matter at first. You were like, forget these people. I'm not even going to spend my time there.
Oh
And then you
yes,
said
my
you
attitude toward
changed
black.
your
Yes.
mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
So
not
those two
writing about it.
questions.
My attitude toward. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Great questions, Will. Great questions. So the reason why I included them was this, because when I was researching the book, I saw that there were Catholic parishes, Catholic schools, other Catholic institutions that said the way we need to deal with this issue is bring in critical race theory, to embrace
Hmm.
liberation theology, and to incorporate the Black Lives Matter movement philosophy into what we're doing. And I said, now, when I first heard that, I'm like, ooh, that don't sound right. But I said, you know what? Here, and this is my attitude. I thought, you know what? What do I really know? Now, liberation theology, I did know something about because I wrote a paper in graduate school. But the
Hmm.
other two, I said, you know what? People keep saying Black Lives Matter movement is bad. People keep saying critical race theory is bad. You know what? I don't know a whole lot about them. Let me find out for myself. Because you know what? In the spirit of fairness, maybe there is something there that
Hmm.
we can use as Catholics, instead of just poo-pooing them and shooing them. And wait a minute, maybe they have something to say that we can incorporate. Because let me be fair. So I went and bought the books of the people who founded critical race theory.
Hmm.
Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, Janine Stefanik, Kimberly Crenshaw. And I read what they had to say critical race theory is. And so when I started looking at the basic tenets of critical race theory, I said, oh my goodness, this is completely incompatible with the Catholic faith. Not because I'm attacking critical race theory, because of what they say of themselves about what it is. And I couldn't
Right.
find any,
Philosophically. Yeah.
yeah, the philosophical stance and their approach. In fact, Derek Bell even says that our approach as Christians is useless. So then why do we want to
Hmm.
incorporate this into the life of the church? Same with the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, the Black Lives Matter, we have to embrace Black Lives Matter. Now, there's nothing wrong with the words Black Lives Matter. Nothing wrong at all. In fact, I would even push back against people who say, well, it shouldn't be Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. You know, when people say Black Lives Matter, when I hear that, what I hear is, here is an entire race of people who, at least in the history of the United States, did not have a voice, were not heard, were not even thought of as human beings in the Dred Scott versus John F. Sanford Supreme Court decision, which I quote at length in the book, to just show the understanding of what this country was toward people of color. And so now you have,
Yeah.
okay, we want our voices to be heard. You know, now this is the time for us to, because of Jim Crow and everything, we our voices, listen to what we have to say. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing even wrong with peaceful protesting. You know, that's because that's Martin Luther King. That's what Gandhi did, peaceful protests.
Hmm.
The problem is it was hijacked by the Black Lives Matter movement.
Hmm.
That's where the problem came in. Because if you look at the basic tenets of the BLM, it's all about, race is a Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is racism on the outside, but inside is an entire agenda to destroy the nuclear family. That's a very
Hmm.
strong statement, but if you look in the book, I show exactly what was posted in the About section on their website that shows their entire agenda of what BLM is all about. And you look at how many times they use transgender. We're working against cisgender privilege and all these other things. I'm like, oh my goodness! And
Well, and
again,
I read it in 2020 when it was still live. So I mean, it's in the book, I know, but like they've tried to scrub that.
see, and I knew
But
they
I
would. So
saw
when I
it.
was researching the book, I said, I'm going to screenshot this. I'm going to keep this different place on my drive because when people find out what they're really about, they're going to take it down. And that's what they
Hmm.
did. But not before I was able to capture all of that. So, because know what that'd be like? Well, people say, well, why are you still writing about they took it down? You know what that would be like Planned Parenthood said, well, okay, our website says we don't do abortions. They could take it down. That means they're going to stop doing abortions? Nope. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing here.
Well, and on that point, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I do want to bring it up because it's in the book and it was absolutely staggering to me. But before I get to that, one other thought on you mentioned the Dred Scott decision. It's like I didn't know. I taught U.S. history. I did not know that Chief Justice Taney was Catholic.
Yeah.
I mean, you added that in the book, and I was like, "Oh, come on, terrible."
Insult
Anyway,
to injury.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was just awful. But you write this. You were talking. You quote Bishop Braxton, but I looked up the statistics, and it's true. For every 1,000 live births, there were 483 abortions for Black women. Highest abortion rate of any racial or ethnic group. I mean that was staggering to me, absolutely staggering to me. And like I know I've heard about Margaret Sanger and some of the eugenics past of Planned Parenthood and how it began. But this isn't history. This is current. This is present day. This was a recent statistic. I mean, these clinics are being put strategically. That's not a conspiracy theory, right?
No, Margaret Sanger was a racist and a eugenicist, point blank. Um, I don't share too much because I wrote the book I wrote on Father Augustus Tolton. I quote more from
Hmm.
her in that book, so I didn't want to repeat that in this book. but
Sure.
people can go and look. I mean, go to Library of Congress. There's a Margaret Sanger collection. You can see what she says in her own words
Yeah,
about wanting
it's
to
horrendous.
eliminate the Negro population, exterminate the Negro population. Come on. But here's what I challenge. That part of the book, Will, I'm challenging our my people, people of color, black, Hispanic, we have to push back, um, and look within ourselves. Look within ourselves. Not just say all these people treated us bad. We're racist. That okay, that may be true, but we also have to look at ourselves. Why are we claiming race, race, race? We're killing our own children. We're destroying our own future. We got these hip hop songs. We're calling our women who were queens. And remember, in First Kings, the Sheba came to Samuel with the retinue of gold and silver and dromedaries and camels and all this wealth. So I mean, our people were kings and queens on the continent of Africa. We were royalty, but now we call our women, B word and whores and all this stuff, and we're killing our own children. So I mean, so part of what I do is I challenge the people of color. Say, hey, wait a minute. If we want people to respect us, we have to first respect ourselves. What about where are our husbands and fathers? Why do most black men who are in prison have no fathers? Where,
Hmm.
where where's the nuclear family? Where's the domestic church? This is why the Catholic Church has the answers. Why am I afraid to walk in the neighborhoods with people that look like me? I mean, why should I be afraid of my own people? See, and a lot of people not gonna like that, but that is true. And what
Hmm.
I'm trying to do, because I love, like I said, I love being black. I want to challenge people of color to look within ourselves and to bring that healing and reconciliation, not keep listening to the culture. To go, if it's not enough to give our kids African names and all that kind of stuff. Let's go back. And I talk about this in the book. I look at what is some of the roots of African spirituality. It's about family. It's about community. It's about wholeness. It's about right. And we've
Hmm.
lost that. We need so let's. I think the Catholic Church is the best of what spirituality has to offer when it comes to this issue of race. So the more we embrace our faith, the more we can bring healing into our communities.
Well, and you mentioned again, I just want to tie a bow on that one about people of color versus African Americans versus black. With that terminology,
Yeah.
why do you prefer people of color versus African American?
Because African Americans is not inclusive enough.
Hmm.
So, for example, if someone calls me, "You're African American," I was born in Barbados. So why are you denying my Caribbean heritage? I remember
Yeah.
I remember once I was with a friend and someone called him African American. He's from Africa. He's from Nigeria. He goes, "I'm not African American. I'm African African." you know, and so look, because
Love it.
we have to come up with these terms because we're afraid to say black. We're afraid to say white. We're afraid to say Hispanic. We're afraid to say or Asian. Because we have to. Oh, I have to come African American. That's more politically correct. And but I just don't think the term. That's just my personal opinion, not the church teaching. Not it's just my personal opinion.
Sure.
I don't think
Yeah.
it's inclusive enough when you're
Hmm.
looking at people from Cuba, from South America, from other places that are dark skinned. I think black covers everybody. It's just simple and it's not offensive.
Well, and it also strategically, like if you're speaking with people who aren't Catholic or it's someone who's maybe even antithetical to the faith in some way, being able to have a more inclusive term is not some sort of politically correct thing. It's just a good practice. I mean, it's that's not a hill I'm willing to die on. Hopefully, no one else is either. Um, you also get into some practicals, and I want to at least mention them because I think they're so powerful. And I had a couple just quick questions on them. So the 5 steps, and I'll just read them. You said here are 5 steps, five specific steps that Catholics can take, both laypersons and clergy working together to accomplish this goal of transcending race and overcoming prejudice. Number 1, see past stereotypes and see people. We've talked about that. Number 2, appreciate the gift of cultural diversity. I think we've talked about that. Promote conversation and dialogue. 4, put God back into society. And 5, pray constantly. And you go through these different ideas, and some of it's super practical, like hosting potlucks. Man, I love potlucks. I'm from North Carolina. We're all about the potlucks. Hospitality is huge. You get some food and some people together, it's going to be a good time. Um, but you know what and this is where I think something like this book is hopefully going to be received so well in the South, because I think it'll give Catholics who want to be part of the solution rather than the problem some practicals to actually be able to put this into action without really doing a whole lot. I mean, it's hosting a potluck. And like you say in here, you can invite Catholics of color from neighboring parishes. Well, here's the thing, in North Carolina, where I grew up, we had two parishes. I never even went to the other parish. I didn't even know it existed until I was a teenager. We were in Baptist country. Like, that was mission territory. And I had black friends who they were like, well, I can't become Catholic. That's a white people religion.
Yeah,
I'm like, y'all, come on. No, it's
that's a
not.
prejudice. Yep.
But but that's so easy to overcome as soon as you understand how big the church is, as soon as you see how universal it is. Um, I know that's not as much of an issue, like say in the deep South, like in places like Louisiana and others. They got other issues, but lots of black priests there, and it's a beautiful thing. But for somewhere like in Arizona, where I am, I go to a parish that I think is predominantly Latino, and that's just because predominantly Hispanics live here. The school I teach at is, I think, around 70% are Mexican, like
Wow.
specifically, they're from Mexico. So like, it's a that's an interesting sort of dynamic all on its own. But like, we do it right for Our Lady of Guadalupe. Like, we have parties, we have like bandas come out and play, like the whole thing, and nobody stops to say, hey, excuse me, you're white, can you please stop partying with this mariachi? Like, so I feel like we're doing something here that hopefully will take root elsewhere. But I know, I mean, having come from North Carolina, I know the history is deep. And like I said, some of these racists that, like true racists that I interacted with, that it's going to take a couple generations. But I will say that their kids were far less prejudiced than they were. So I do see some sort of motion, at least in a lot of places. But one question I did have is, for somewhere that doesn't have a lot of people of color. They say it's just a like middle of Nebraska. I've never been to Nebraska. I'm assuming it's all white people and corn. Um, one of my friends is from Nebraska. He's going to watch this and be like, "Hey, watch it." Um, but how does this not turn into tokenism or virtue signaling? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a couple easy things. We can't do the potluck. There's no people of color around. There's a couple things you can do. One of them is, for example, in Catholic schools, they should be studying the saints, right? But it shouldn't be all Saint Francis of Assisi or Saint Catherine Siena, who are amazing saints who I love. But what about Saint Josephine Bakhita?
mm-hmm.
What about Moses the Black? What about Juan Diego? What about what about the saints of color? And I know we have we have Black Catholic History Month, which is November. You know, and I agree with Morgan Freeman. My history should not be relegated to a month. You know, but I mean, I think it's good in the sense that it's a launching point. It's a starting point for, at least people are looking at saints of different colors in the church, but to purposely incorporate them and learning
Mm-hmm.
about them and their stories into the curriculum as these kids are learning about saints. They're not just learning about European saints, they're learning about the incredible rich diversity of the saints, the Ugandan martyrs, the Korean martyrs, Saint Paul Tagan, and those martyrs who died in Korea, the Japanese martyrs. I mean, there's such an incredible rich diversity that
Mm-hmm.
should be part of the curriculum. And second, what about inside the church? Putting up, I mentioned this in the book, putting up pictures of saints
Yeah, I
of
love
color in
that
the church.
idea.
So imagine a 5-year-old walking with her dad, and this 5-year-old has never seen a black saint before, or maybe they have even black Catholic because they go into church that don't have any. And they walk and they see Josephine Bakhita, and she looks up, Daddy, who's that? Well, that's Josephine Bakhita. She's a saint? Yes. And here's a little bit about her story. And Now this child is looking at a black person who's a saint in the church, someone that we revere, someone that we look
Mm,
up to, someone that we can ask their intercession to Jesus. Now, how's she going to form her opinion about people of color? You see,
yeah.
we're putting a different narrative instead of being formed by television and movies. She's now being formed by images she's seeing in her own church where she goes to worship God every week. You see that little things like that, I think, make a big difference.
Well, and when I've had you out to when I worked at a parish, we had you out a couple times, and you met a couple of our priests from Nigeria, and I always talk to, especially when I'm talking to people who I knew from the South who were prejudiced, and they're like, "Well, Catholicism is a white religion," and I'm like, I confess my sins to a black man like once a week. I have no problem with this because all I see is Jesus and it's all good.
Amen. Amen.
Um,
Yep.
so it's like, yeah, Father, I don't see you. I see like in mass,
Yes.
same thing. That's why they put on the vestments. And I think man, the Catholic faith is absolutely the best way forward for everyone, for everything, but especially for
See,
this issue of race. I mean, you're
See,
right.
Will, that's exactly why I make that statement, because you hit the nail on the head. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that the Protestant churches aren't bad, but let's be real. A lot of them have become chameleons. They've capitulated to the culture, and they freely incorporated a lot of these things that we talked about as cultural solutions,
Mm,
cultural constructs into their worship system. And we don't do that as Catholics. We stay focused on Jesus Christ and the gospel. And that's why we can have priests from even my diocese too. In fact, my parish is run by not just the pastors from Tanzania. His order supplies priests to our parish. So my parish is not in the normal rotation of maybe 6 years and another 6 years and then move on to another parish. We're
mhm.
completely supplied by this missionary order of priests from Tanzania, and we've had some wonderful priests in our parish helping us to bring Jesus to us in the sacraments, to bring healing Jesus mission to the sacrament of reconciliation, to literally go out and we have alongside of our church, although it's been dealt with now, we had drug dealing and prostitution right along the side of the church, and to go
Mm,
out there with the pastor to minister to those people, it's a beautiful thing. So it has nothing to do with color. It's all about the
yeah.
gospel and following Jesus.
Well, and just to echo something you said earlier, I mean, I when I was growing up, I wanted to go to my friend's church, and it was a Black Baptist church, and they were like, "Nah, man, you can't do that." I'm like, "I just want to come see. Like, am I not allowed to come to a Baptist service?" And they're like, "No, you can. There's plenty of churches you can go to, but you can't come to this one because they just won't like it." I'm like, "Well,
Mm.
that's kind of messed up." And it stuck with me. I was like, that doesn't seem right.
Well,
But like you were saying, go to the Spanish mass or something. I was in
yeah,
Orange
you know where that
County.
comes from, Will, though? Where that
Mm,
comes from, because back in the day, at least for the Catholics, and
mm,
I mentioned this in the book, even in my parish, Immaculate Heart, which is a traditionally German and Irish parish,
yeah.
during
Hmm.
World War II, when a lot of black Catholics came up from the South to work in the shipyards during World War II, my parish was the closest parish to the shipyards. And so they would walk up the hill from the river to Immaculate Heart, and they had to sit in the back of the church. They had to sit in the choir
Mm,
loft. Some
yeah.
not my parish, but some parishes didn't even allow them to come into worship. And they're supposed to be Catholics. Why are we following Jim Crow and the secular law instead of following the law of Jesus Christ? Same thing in the Protestant world. So what they did,
Yeah.
which we can't readily do in the Catholic Church, but in the Protestant Church, they started their own churches. They won't allow us to worship, but we're going to worship ourselves. So that's where. So now, when a
Yeah. That
white
makes
person
sense.
comes in, what are you doing here? Go to your church.
Yeah.
But again, these are institutional memories of things that happened in the past, and we can't become slaves to the past. Will, the past helps shape us into the people that we are today, but the past should not determine our future. A deep, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, immersing ourselves deeply into the Gospels, into the Beatitudes, into everything that Jesus taught. Love your enemies and pray for them. Love God and your neighbor and ourselves. All the things that Jesus taught, that should be the way forward.
Amen. I mean, I think that's as good a place to end as any. I know that we're up against our time, but I really appreciate you coming on, Deacon. Thank you so much. And thank you for this book. It's, again, so well researched, really well argued, and just focused on Jesus Christ, as everything you do is. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service to the church. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Will, and thank you for your podcast. And yeah, I know when last time we were together, you were talking about doing a podcast and stuff, and so it's so good. I have you. I'm subscribed, by the way. I hope everybody else listening subscribe too.
Nice.
And
Thank
I
you.
keep up
Yes.
with whenever you put a new podcast on. I always get that bell, and I always what's Will talking about today? So great content, man. You're doing some phenomenal work.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Deacon. If you wanted to subscribe, go to gooddistinctions.com. Deacon, where can people find you? Obviously, the book is through Ignatius Press, Building a Civilization of Love, a Catholic Response to Racism. But other than the book, I mean, anything you want to plug?
Well, I have a new radio show starting on EWTN in very soon. It's called Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. And I have some other things come up that I'm a little premature to talk about now, but they're all exciting. And God has been so good, and it's great to have wonderful friends like you, Will, where we can come together and collaborate like this and help people to really understand the power of cooperating with the grace of the sacraments and what God can do in your life where you're not afraid to say yes.
Amen. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for the collab. And anytime and anything you want to send my way, I'll send it out to everybody. But thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Deacon.
Will. God bless you.
You too.